Baseball is a fantastic game.
Welcome to the third and final video where we explore just who are the Phillies who are in the Hall of Fame. Now, just a brief reminder of our criteria. We're looking for any members of the Hall of Fame who played at least one game with the Philadelphia Phillies. We are going year by year to look at each class of Hall of Fame inductees. Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball History. On this channel, we talk about the history of baseball from the A's to the Phillies to the 19th century. And sometimes we talk about contemporary baseball issues. So if you love baseball and if you love Philadelphia, stick around and subscribe to our channel. How do you show your home team pride? With mugs, T-shirts, masks, phone cases, tote bags, and so much more. Check out tpublic.com and search for Philadelphia Baseball History. 1974 saw the induction of Sam Thompson. Sam Thompson was the last of the Phillies to be inducted into the Hall of Fame from that 1894 outfield, the outfield that had 400 hitters. In fact, in that year, Sam Thompson hit .415. However, that was not good enough for the National League batting title. Instead, the batting title went to Hugh Duffy. Sam Thompson, he spent 15 seasons in the major leagues from 1885 until 1906, with a couple of years off before he made a special appearance for Detroit in 1906. 10 of those seasons he spent with the Phillies, from 1889 through 1898. He ended his career with 125 home runs, which, during the dead ball era, was quite an achievement. With the Phillies, he led the National League in home runs twice, and he led the National League in RBIs twice. And after 10 years with the Phillies, he had a .334 batting average with the team. In 1975, we had the induction of Bucky Harris. Now, Bucky Harris was a manager, and he was mostly known for managing the Washington Senators. However, he managed the Philadelphia Phillies in 1943. So this brings us to 1976. We'll start off with infielder Roger Connor. Connor played 15 seasons at the end of the 19th century. Connor played mostly first and third base. He had a lifetime .310 batting average and an .883 OPS. He played one season with the Phillies, which was 1892. In that season, he batted .294, also with a .883 OPS. He also led the league in doubles that year. Which brings us to Hall of Fame right-handed pitcher Robin Roberts. Roberts played 19 seasons in the majors. 14 of those seasons were with the Phillies. He was a 286-game winner with a lifetime ERA of 3.41. Roberts is, of course, known for being part of that 1950 Whiz Kids team that won the National League pennant. He was a 7-time All-Star. And Robin Roberts led the majors in wins from 1952 through 1955. In 1979, we come to Hack Wilson, a center fielder known mostly for his time with the Cubs. Wilson's career batting average was .307. He spent 12 seasons with the Cubs, and he spent one season with the Philadelphia Phillies. While with the Cubs, he had 4 seasons when he led the league in home runs and 2 seasons when he led the league in RBIs. In 1930, he hit 56 home runs while he was playing for the Cubs. Wilson played his last season with the Phillies, 1934. In that season, he appeared in 6 games. And this brings us to 1980. And in 1980, we had the induction of right fielder Chuck Klein. Chuck Klein had a 17-year career, and during his career, he spent most or part of 15 seasons with the Philadelphia Phillies. However, he had 3 different stints with the Phillies, and each of those times he wore a different number, which is why when the Phillies wanted to honor Chuck Klein, instead of retiring a number, they retired a P. Chuck Klein was a 2-time All-Star. He won the Triple Crown in 1933, and then he won the National League MVP in 1934. In fact, 1933 was also the year that Jimmy Fox won the Triple Crown. It marks the first time that 2 players from the same city won the Triple Crown in their respective leagues. Over his career, he hit 300 home runs, and he led the National League in home runs 4 times. So between 1981 and 1989, well, there were no Phillies, another long drought. However, in 1990, we had the induction of Joe Morgan. Joe Morgan is, of course, known mostly for his time with the Houston Astros and the Cincinnati Reds. He was part of that big Reds machine that was a powerhouse of the mid-1970s. In 1983, Morgan joined two of his former Reds teammates with the Philadelphia Phillies, a team that was affectionately known as the Wheeze Kids because of its emphasis on veterans. Morgan had an incredible September in 1983, and his efforts helped put the Phillies over the top to win the National League East. The Phillies would of course go on to win the pennant in 1983, beating the Dodgers in the NLCS, but then fall to the Orioles in the World Series. Joe Morgan unfortunately left us last year, and we've done a tribute video to him. We'll have a link in the description below. In 1991, we had right-handed pitcher Ferguson Jenkins. Jenkins is known mostly for his time with the Cubs. However, Jenkins came up through the Phillies farm system. Through the 1965 and 1966 seasons, Jenkins played a total of 8 games for the Phillies. He was then traded to the Cubs. In his 19-year career, he spent 10 years with the Cubs, and over the course of his career, he won 284 games, posting an ERA of 3.34. This brings us to 1994. And in 1994, we had a series of 3 years in a row where popular Phillies were inducted into the Hall of Fame. Starting in 1994, we had lefty Steve Carlton. Now, as we look back to 1972, it's interesting when we think of that trade that brought Steve Carlton to Philadelphia as being one of the greatest trades in Phillies team history. But when you look at it from the point of view of Phillies fans at the time, at first it wasn't very popular. You see, back in 1972, Phillies fans weren't keen on losing Rick Wise. In the season just before, not only did he throw a no-hitter, but in the same game he hit 2 home runs that beat the Cincinnati Reds. In fact, the 1971 season was a really good career season for Rick Wise. But the Cardinals owner, Gussie Busch, well, he grew annoyed that Steve Carlton had the gumption to ask for a raise. This was, of course, in the time before free agency, so Busch made it be known that he wanted Carlton out of St. Louis. And while a number of teams were in the bidding for Steve Carlton, the Phillies made the best offer. When Steve Carlton joined the Phillies in 1972, well, he showed his worth. He won 27 games that year, which was over 40% of the entire total of the Phils, who were a last-place team. In fact, he won 27 games in a year when the season was shortened by 12 games due to a strike, prompting a question. If not for the strike, could he have won 30 games? At one point, Lefty won 15 games in a row. In fact, manager Paul Owens was so confident in his pitcher that when Carlton was in the middle of his winning streak and the Phillies were playing in Los Angeles against Tommy John, it was a scoreless tie when Carlton's time at bat came up. Carlton looked at Owens to see if he was going to be replaced by a pinch hitter. But instead, Owens let Carlton hit away. And what was Carlton's response? Well, he hit a 2-run triple. And those were the only 2 runs scored in the entire game. And that was Carlton's first Cy Young season. You see, Carlton's 1972 season was fueled by his devastating slider pitch, a pitch that's just unhittable by right-handed hitters. When Carlton was with the Cardinals, they wouldn't let him throw the slider. They feared it would damage his arm. Well, Carlton went on to pitch 15 seasons with the Phillies. He amassed over 3,000 strikeouts with the Phillies alone and won 4 Cy Young awards. At the time, that was a record. There was one point in the early 80s where Carlton and Nolan Ryan would trade off on who was the all-time strikeout king. Carlton would pitch and he would take his turn at the top of the board, and then Ryan would pitch and he would take his turn. Carlton ended his career with 4,136 strikeouts. That was the most by any left-handed pitcher. Well, at least until Randy Johnson came along. Carlton retired as a 10-time All-Star and the greatest pitcher in Phillies history. We did a deep dive on Carlton and his relationship with his catchers. We'll have a link to that video in the description box below. And this brings us to 1995. 1995 was a special year for Phillies fans because we had the induction of 2 popular Phillies at the same time. We'll start by talking about Richie Ashburn. Richie Ashburn, who was affectionately known as Whitey, well, he burst into the league as a 21-year-old rookie in the 1948 season. He was part of that young, homegrown group of talent known as the Whiz Kids, who surprised the major leagues by winning the National League pennant in 1950. In his rookie year, Richie Ashburn batted .333 and made the All-Star team. Ashburn would go on to win the batting title in the National League twice, and in 1958, he led the majors with a .350 batting average. Richie Ashburn also had speed. He led the majors in stolen bases in his rookie year, and his speed allowed him to be an excellent defensive outfielder, as he could cover a lot of territory in center field. However, Ashburn's time in Philadelphia, well, it was overshadowed by three center fielders playing out of New York: Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. And for a long time, Ashburn was overlooked for Hall of Fame induction. Remember that New York bias I talked about in the last video? So after Ashburn retired as a player, he joined the Phillies broadcasting crew in 1963. And in 1971, he was teamed up with a new play-by-play broadcaster, Harry Kalas. For over 25 years, Harry Kalas and Richie Ashburn showed such chemistry as the play-by-play and color announcers for the Phillies that they were adored by Phillies fans. Ashburn also wrote a baseball column for the Philadelphia Bulletin and the Philadelphia Daily News. And this prompted Ashburn to joke with Kalas that he was going to miss being inducted into the Hall of Fame in 3 different ways. Well, Phillies fans were having none of that. They mounted a campaign to get Ashburn inducted into the Hall of Fame. The slogan was, "Why the Hall not?" So the Veterans Committee selected Ashburn to be admitted into the Hall of Fame in 1995, the very same year that Mike Schmidt was elected by the writers in his first year of eligibility. Ashburn and Schmidt were the only 2 living inductees that year, and this prompted Phillies fans to take over Cooperstown in the last weekend of July of 1995. If you watch the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, all you'll see is a sea of red in the audience. And on a personal note, I got the chance to meet Richie Ashburn as an 18-year-old making his first trip to Clearwater. I can tell you from experience, he was a very gracious man. Michael Jack Schmidt. What can one say about Mike Schmidt? Probably the greatest Philly to ever don a uniform. But his relationship with the fans, well, it wasn't always that great. You see, by 1978, Mike Schmidt had been a 3-time All-Star and had led the National League in home runs 3 times. However, the fans blamed Schmidt for not stepping it up and performing in the playoffs. Indeed, the fans put a lot of blame on Mike Schmidt over the fact that the Phillies had lost 3 straight National League Championship Series. In 1979, the Phillies signed veteran free agent Pete Rose, and Mike Schmidt gives Rose a lot of credit for helping him develop into a Hall of Fame caliber player. In 1979, Mike Schmidt topped 40 home runs for the first time in his career, hitting 45. Then in 1980, Mike Schmidt hit 48 home runs. They included home runs on back-to-back days in Montreal, which gave the Phillies the National League East Division. And then in the World Series, well, he won the World Series MVP award. He was a key reason why the Phillies won their first World Championship in their 97-year history. And that was the first of Mike Schmidt's National League MVP years. In 1981, Mike Schmidt hit 31 home runs, despite the strike-shortened season. If he had played a full 162 games on the pace he was at, he could have hit 50. Mike Schmidt won his 3rd NL MVP award in 1986, even though he played on a second-place Phillies team. That was a good 20 games behind the Mets. He led the league both in home runs and RBIs while maintaining a .290 average. And of course, Mike Schmidt gave Phillies fans a thrill in the following season when he hit his 500th home run. Quite a milestone. 2 years later, Mike Schmidt decided to retire. He had come to the conclusion that he just couldn't play third base up to his own standards anymore. And baseball fans? They responded by honoring Schmidt by making him the first player elected to the All-Star team despite retiring earlier in the season. In all, Schmidt made 12 All-Star teams, he won 10 Gold Gloves, 6 Silver Sluggers, and hit 548 home runs. Schmidt still leads the Phillies in, of course, home runs, but also WAR, offensive WAR, defensive WAR, games played, plate appearances, runs scored, total bases, walks, strikeouts, extra base hits, and RBIs, and he's second in total hits. In fact, Mike Schmidt is a rarity, having spent his entire 17-year career with the Philadelphia Phillies. And then in the following year, 1996, the Hall of Fame inducted right-handed pitcher Jim Bunning. What's interesting about Jim Bunning is that he spent more time with the Tigers than with the Phillies. However, when asked which logo he would like to have on his plaque, he wanted to have the Phillies logo. He spent 6 years with Philadelphia. He came to the Phillies in 1964 and made his mark immediately. He's most famously known for his Father's Day perfect game against the Mets. And we've done a video that talks about the Father's Day perfect game. We'll have a link to that video in the description box below. This now brings us to the class of 2000. 2000, first we had the induction of infielder Tony Perez. Tony Perez, of course, was known mostly for his time with the Big Red Machine. But like Joe Morgan, he came to the Phillies during 1983. That was the Phillies' centennial season, and he joined former Reds Joe Morgan and Pete Rose in a team which affectionately was known as the Wheeze Kids. And in another nod to the Big Red Machine, 2000 saw the induction of manager Sparky Anderson. Sparky Anderson, of course, is known for managing the Reds and the Detroit Tigers. However, as a player, he came up through the Phillies farm system. He played in one Major League season, and that was 1959. During that time, he batted .218 with the Phillies. So, yeah, he was a better manager than player. In 2005, we had the induction of Ryne Sandberg. Sandberg is, of course, known by Phillies fans as being involved in the worst trade in Phillies history. A trade that brought Ivan De Jesus to Philadelphia, but sent Larry Bowa to the Cubs, with Ryne Sandberg as, well, a throw-in. Sandberg then proceeded to play 15 seasons with the Cubs as a second baseman and earn his way into the Hall of Fame. Now, some say that the Phillies got hoodwinked by the Ryne Sandberg trade. By that time, former manager Dallas Green had become the general manager of the Chicago Cubs. In fact, Dallas Green had served as a scout as well as the director of the farm system for the Phillies, so he was well aware of Ryne Sandberg's potential. The argument is that the trade was actually for Ryne Sandberg and not Larry Bowa, that Larry Bowa was really the throw-in for the Cubs. In 2011, we had the induction of an executive who had connections with the Phillies, Pat Gillick. Gillick was mostly known as being the general manager of the Toronto Blue Jays, especially during the time when the Blue Jays won their 2 world championships. But Gillick spent 3 years with the Phillies, 2006 through 2008, so he had a big hand in building that 2008 world champion Philadelphia Phillies team. This brings us to 2014 and the induction of Pedro Martinez. In 2009, the Phillies obtained Martinez in order to give their starting rotation an extra oomph in order to make it into the postseason again. In his time with the Phillies, Pedro Martinez went 5-1 and had a .363 ERA. And that brings us to 2018. In 2018, we had the induction of Jim Thome. When Jim Thome signed with the Phillies as a free agent for the 2003 season, he had already had a 12-year career with the Cleveland Indians and had hit over 330 home runs. Thome helped the Phillies stabilize the first base position and hit 47 home runs in 2003. In the following year, in 2004, Thome hit 42. He quickly became a fan favorite. Unfortunately, injuries plagued Jim Thome in the 2005 season, but waiting in the wings was Ryan Howard. After the 2005 season, the Phillies traded Jim Thome to the White Sox in order to make room on first base for Howard. But Thome remained a fan favorite, and the Phillies jumped at an opportunity to re-sign him as a free agent in 2012. Unfortunately, the years had caught up with Jim Thome by that time. Back problems prevented him from playing first base on a consistent basis. As a result, the Phillies traded him to Baltimore so he could finish out his career as a designated hitter in the American League. And in the end, Gentleman Jim had 612 home runs in his career. 101 of those home runs came while he played with the Phillies. Which brings us to 2019, which was the last year that a Philly was inducted into the Hall of Fame, at least at the time of this recording. And that Philly was Roy Halladay. When the Phillies obtained Roy Halladay in December of 2009, he was already a 6-time All-Star and an American League Cy Young Award winner. And he made his mark as soon as he joined the team in 2010. In May of 2010, he became only the second Philly to throw a perfect game, this time against the Florida Marlins. In the regular season, he won 21 games, and then in the postseason, he became only the second pitcher ever to throw a no-hitter in the playoffs. Of course, in 2011, he was part of that special 4 aces starting rotation that just blew away the National League. 2011 was the second year in a row that Halladay made the All-Star team as a Philly, and after he finished his career with 4 years with the Phillies, he had an ERA of 3.25. And there are people connected to the Phillies that some say should be in the Hall of Fame. Players like Sherry McGee, Gabby Cravath, and Cy Williams, and baseball pioneer Al Reach. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Are there former players who you think should be in the Hall of Fame? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, hit the notification button, tell your friends about us, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you have any ideas for topics that we can cover in the future, please let us know in the comments below. If you would like to see more of these videos, please consider becoming a patron through Patreon. Again, we'll have a link in the description box below.